For centuries, national economies were managed by absolute monarchs focused entirely on extracting wealth. The realization that markets actually operate on their own natural laws took generations to develop. The history of economic thought tracks that realization. It studies how human understanding of trade and value evolved alongside the physical changes in the structure of society. The baseline for this evolution was the medieval economy. Society was organized into isolated, self-sufficient rural manors, and trade was limited to small-scale local barter. As those feudal manors dissolved, a system of commercial capitalism took hold. Goods began moving across much longer distances, replacing local barter with money-based exchange. As trade networks grew more complex, early thinkers realized that a functioning economy required some form of internal logic, even if they hadn't yet mapped it out. The political map was also consolidating. Fragmented territories ruled by warring lords merged into unified nationalist states. The growing merchant class needed stability to operate. They looked to a strong, centralized authority, a despot king, to protect their physical assets and secure trade routes against foreign rivals. Simultaneously, the Protestant Reformation challenged medieval theology. It introduced a rational concept of religion that validated individualism, personal freedom, and the contract rights essential for commerce. The Renaissance furthered this shift, moving the cultural focus away from enduring earthly misery for heavenly rewards and toward the pursuit of materialistic happiness in the present. New technologies like the mariner's compass allowed European fleets to navigate the open ocean, expanding the physical boundaries of their trade networks. Columbus reached the Americas, and vast reserves of gold and silver from New World mines began flooding into the European economy. There was no systematic academic theory guiding this expansion. What we call mercantilism was simply a raw, uncoordinated intellectual reaction to a rapidly expanding, highly materialistic world. The defining dogma of the era was Booleanism. This was the strict belief that national power was measured by gold and silver reserves. Mercantilists operated on a fixed pie mindset. They assumed the total volume of global wealth was static, meaning that expanding one nation's slice of wealth required shrinking the slice of a rival. Economic growth, in the modern sense, did not exist in their framework. International trade was viewed as a zero-sum game, with no possibility for mutual benefit. To win this game, a country had to maintain a favorable balance of trade. The strategy was to export more goods than you import, ensuring a net influx of foreign coin. This created a specific fear of goods. Mercantilist states aggressively pushed their finished manufactured products out of the country to dispose of inventory in exchange for hard currency. Conversely, they exhibited a deep hunger for money. Governments banned the export of valuable raw materials and placed heavy tariffs on foreign imports to keep the hoarded gold bullion inside their borders. Trade was weaponized. Early mercantilist economics functioned as a bloodless war of attrition, designed specifically to drain rival nations of their physical wealth. Executing this global strategy required massive royal merchant fleets, operating under absolute, state-granted monopolies like the East India Company. The merchants received exclusive rights, eliminating all domestic competition. In exchange, the king secured a steady stream of tax revenue to fund the Royal Navy and expand the empire. To maximize output, mercantilists prioritized labor as the most critical factor of production, followed by land, while largely ignoring the role of capital investment. States engaged in demographic engineering to increase the workforce. They implemented measures to lower the age of marriage and restrict emigration, forcing rapid population growth. A massive labor pool allowed the state to intentionally suppress domestic wages.
Keeping production costs cheap at home ensured their manufactured goods remained competitive on the global market. Later mercantilists realized that hoarding gold in vaults was inefficient. They recognized that injecting this money into circulation would lower interest rates and stimulate domestic trade. National supremacy was achieved by feeding a state-controlled export machine. The cost of this global dominance was the systematic suppression of the wages and liberties of the domestic working class. By the mid-18th century, the consequences of this system caught up with France. Mercantilist policies had subsidized urban industry while neglecting the agricultural foundation of the country, leaving the soil exhausted. Decades of extravagant spending at the Palace of Versailles, combined with costly foreign wars, drained the royal treasury. The French state was now effectively bankrupt. To cover the deficits, the crown levied crushing, regressive taxes exclusively on peasant farmers. The wealthy nobility and the church remained legally exempt. In response to this crisis, François Quesnay founded physiocracy, or the rule of nature. His group argued that society should be governed by natural moral laws rather than the destructive, man-made laws of mercantilism. The absolute failure of state-managed trade forced theorists to look inward. They searched for an organic, self-sustaining model of economics that did not rely on extracting wealth from neighbors. The physiocrats moved past the bullionist obsession. They defined wealth as real, consumable commodities, the physical goods that sustain human life. Their central concept was the produit net, or the net product. They observed that agriculture is the only sector that creates a physical surplus over its own cost of production. You plant 1 seed, and nature returns 10. Based on this, they divided society into 3 classes. The first was the productive class, composed of the farmers who actively worked the land to extract this net product. Second was the proprietary class. These were the landlords who produced nothing directly, but held legal claim to the agricultural surplus in the form of rent. Finally, there was the sterile class, made up of artisans and manufacturers. They transformed raw materials into finished goods, but because they simply altered existing matter, they created no new net physical surplus. Economic analysis was no longer about the accumulation of dead metal. It was now focused on the regeneration of living biological surplus. To show how this surplus sustained the entire nation, Quesnay designed the tableau économique. It was the first systematic macroeconomic model, mapping the flow of wealth through the economy, much like blood circulating through a living organism. This diagram illustrates Quesnay's model. Farmers generate 5 milliards, retaining 2 for food and seed. They pay 2 milliards to proprietors as rent, who spend it on food and artisan goods. Artisans then trade back to farmers for raw materials. This tracks monetary flow. Initially, the 2 milliards is held by the productive class. Farmers pay rent to landlords, who redistribute it. Through purchases of tools and raw materials, the cash flows back. By year's end, the 2 milliards returns. Quesnay's model demonstrated that an economy is an interdependent, closed-loop system. To survive the next fiscal year, every sector must reset its cash and materials in a state of equilibrium. To ensure this cycle continued, Quesnay identified exactly what agriculture needed to function. He categorized investments into circulating capital, fixed capital for equipment, and long-term land improvements. Armed with this data, the physiocrats launched a direct assault on mercantilist laws. They demanded an end to luxury, the removal of trade restrictions, and the abolition of indirect taxes. By mapping the mechanics of the tableau, the physiocrats proved that the market possessed a self-balancing natural order. They dismantled the argument for strict state control, laying the intellectual foundation for modern laissez-faire capitalism.